issue facing our country right now.
With me this morning, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor frontbencher Nick Champion. Good morning to you both, Kelly.
Morning.
What do you make of this debate where it's at the moment? The Prime Minister saying it's confronting. Should he or shouldn't he use those terms in describing the Muslim headdress?
Well, look, Tony Burke is simply trying to beat this issue into a frenzy, and I think that is irresponsible, actually. And I won't take lessons from Tony Burke on responsible government, because we saw a Labor government that he was a central part of being one of the most irresponsible Labor governments that has ever been. I think Tony's comments, the Prime Minister's comments about security and the need to identify people was entirely appropriate. And those comments have been repeated by a number of other people. It is appropriate to make sure that where people need to be identified when entering into buildings, that appropriate identification actually takes place. And we need to take advice from security agencies in relation to how that is appropriately conducted. I think there is nothing remotely controversial about that.
In terms of that security component, that is a reasonable statement, isn't it? On any building, that the security agencies need to make judgments on a...
Well, I guess we'd wait to see what advice the security agencies gave us, and that's a matter in the hands of the Speaker. But look, you can just tell from the way the government's going about this, it's a divisive issue for the government. In the Daily Telegraph today, we've got a backbencher, Andrew Laming, writing that they shouldn't ban the burqa, and then we've got the Prime Minister, you know, sort of just let me finish. I always give you a fair go. I always give you a fair go. And then we've got the Prime Minister ad-libbing. And the problem is it's divisive for the government, it's divisive for the community, and it doesn't really address the issues which, you know, the Australian public are concerned about extremism, about young people being led down dangerous paths. So we've got to, you know, concentrate on what actually matters rather than these very emotive and divisive debates. And it's unfortunate that the Prime Minister, you know, kind of ad-libbed on it because he is the Prime Minister of this country and he does have a responsibility to the unity of the nation and the unity of his government.
Kelly, you spoke about the security component, and I think, you know, many people would agree with you. That's fair enough. What about the element where the Prime Minister expressing a view, as he did in opposition, he's now Prime Minister, that he's confronted by the headdress? Is it really, you know, is it something a Prime Minister should say, making judgments on people's
Well, I think the first point to note, and you were very, I think, tricky when you said just before that the Prime Minister's comments were somehow to be conflated in with this idea of banning the burqa. That's not what he said. That is not what he said at all. He made some comments in relation to the burqa and how he personally felt about it. Now, look, he's perfectly entitled to articulate his views. We live, the last time I checked, in a free society where we can actually articulate
Kelly,
our views on this.
If we live in a free society, then people should be able to wear what they like.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you on that, right?
I'm glad.
I mean,
That's
not an issue. I mean, I'm not confronted by clothing. You know, I heard some comments made by the Deputy Leader, Julie Bishop, where she said the same. Everybody's entitled to their views on this issue, and I think the idea that Labor is trying to beat this into a divisive issue is very irresponsible. And you know, I would say to you, Nick, give the advice you just gave on national television to Tony Burke, who is the Leader of Opposition in the House.
You can't say something. The Prime Minister can't put something out there and not expect the community to react, his government to react, journalists to react. I mean, he doesn't exist in a bubble, Kelly. He's the Prime Minister of the country and he's got to adjust to that. And, you know, all we've seen last year is a guy who had a plan for opposition but not a plan for government, not a plan for the nation.
The Attorney General, very soon after the PM made those comments yesterday, said it's none of his business what people wear. It was very quick, even if you hadn't seen the comments, a very quick indication of a very different view on this matter at a time of heightened tension, and there's no doubt about that, there is heightened tension in this community. Is it something the Prime Minister should say?
Well, look, I think you've got to see his comments in context, and his comments in context were entirely appropriate. He is perfectly entitled to give his personal views on these issues, and I think the idea of trying to beat this into a bigger issue than it actually is actually the real irresponsibility here. And I agree with you, we should be focusing on the real challenges that face us as a country, a real terrorist threat that we do face, extremism within our community, the fact that we have needed to enhance the capacity of our security security agencies so that they can do their job. And the fact that we have 160 people in Australia either fighting overseas in this terrorist activity over in Iraq and in Syria, or financing that activity overseas.
Is it absurd that we are being distracted by this issue? Is it a side issue, given the gravity of what Kelly's saying?
Of course it's a side issue. Of course it's a side issue. But the only reason the only reason we're discussing it is because the highest office bearer in the land decided to put it into the national media. Up until then, it was all the, sideshow players who want to ban the burqa and they want to ban halal biscuits. They're out there smearing pig fat on saladas and all this other sort of stuff. It was a sideshow until the Prime Minister put it into the middle of our public discourse. And that's the problem with it, Kieran. It really was a game for fringe players. And now it's been put at the centre of our national discourse, and that's unfortunate and unnecessary.
There were suggestions that the aid budget is going to be delayed, the increase in the aid budget to fund the military deployment, the broader fight on terrorism. The Prime Minister was asked about this at a news conference, that news conference in Melbourne that we referred to a bit earlier. Let's have a look.
We have slowed the growth of foreign aid. Foreign aid was slated to explosively grow under the former government. Every year the former government put off the growth, but nevertheless it was still slated to grow explosively under the former government. We have restrained that growth essentially to CPI in coming years. I think this is a reasonable change, but it certainly means that Australia will continue to have a very strong and effective foreign aid program in the months and years ahead.
Now, the Foreign Minister has had a different response to this. She says there is nothing before Cabinet suggesting that there's going to be any delay in the increase in the aid budget. Is this an example where something's being floated but without the Foreign Minister's knowledge of it?
Well, I don't think there's been any contradiction between what the Prime Minister has said and what the Foreign Minister has said. She has said that there's nothing that's gone to Cabinet, and that is the case. The Prime Minister hasn't said anything different. Let's just go back, though, a couple of steps here, because I know that the Labor Party made great claims during their time in government that they were going to dramatically increase the foreign aid budget. And, of course, on 3 successive occasions, they delayed the increase in spending on foreign aid. So, I mean, to take a lecture from them about foreign aid is completely bizarre. We have made sure that our foreign aid budget is stable. We're spending over $5 billion a year on foreign aid, and we are increasing that budget each year, but we're doing it responsibly.
But isn't there an argument to say this is a military intervention in a humanitarian crisis? A lot of governments do say that that's aid in terms of military deployment, that is an appropriate use of aid spending. Why not do that?
Well, look, we've been very clear on quarantining foreign aid as direct foreign aid, and we have said that we are going to be spending over $5 billion a year on foreign aid, which is incredibly significant. When you actually look at all of the countries in the world and how much they commit to foreign aid per capita, we are right up there as one of the top nations in the world and what we contribute.
Sure, and there's a legitimate debate, though, about defence spending in this sort of scenario where you go in on a humanitarian focus to say that that's aid. It is a debate that's being had right now at the OECD and elsewhere, and how you define it.
Look, foreign aid isn't charity. What it is an essential component of our diplomatic, security and foreign relations strategy to engage with the rest of the world. And I guess while hard power might be used on occasion, really, the way we should see foreign aid is a mechanism to ensure peace and stability. And no one's trying to give anybody lectures, but what we are trying to do is focus on the government's record. And they cut $7.7 million from foreign aid to Iraq. And that sort of thing has a big effect. Obviously, what we want to do is have a national conversation about how we best secure the world, how we best secure our region. It's unfortunate, I think, that cabinet battles are being fought out in the news media, because that's not good for cabinet government. That's not good for Australia, and it's not good to have people. Say whatever you like. Say whatever you like. There were very, very few cabinet discussions that leaked during that.
Permanently at war.
Very few. You guys, on the other hand, have ministers constantly pitching. And we saw it on the car industry. The industry minister out there pitching one thing, the Treasurer doing another. And now we see the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister at odds in full view of the public, rather than debating these things in Cabinet. But it's there in the public discourse now, and I guess we'll have to discuss it. But people need to be aware, our foreign aid budget, it isn't charity. What it is an essential component to peace and stability in our world.
We've got to go to a break. Back in just a moment on AIM Agenda.
We move more than ever before. We don't sit still, except when it comes to our super. So come on, Australia, let's get our super moving too. Kinetic Super. Get your super moving.
When people say, I'm so hungry, I can literally eat a horse, they mean figuratively.
But when we say at Luxbet, you can literally double your chances of winning, we mean if your horse comes in second, you will literally get a winner's payout of up to $500. Place a bet on Saturday's Epsom Handicap and literally get 2 chances to win.
Join Luxbet today to get our great first deposit offer. Luxbet.com.
Qantas's biggest early bird sale is now on. More continents, all at amazing prices. Book now for great fares. Visit Qantas.com or see your travel agent.
I'm Rick Milne. I'm an official valuer of Sporting Collectibles and, like you, a footy fanatic. If you're a Hawks fan, you'll love this.
This first edition pure silver coin will be minted by the Royal Australian Mint and released in conjunction with the AFL to celebrate the Hawks' 2014 win. Buy the coin by itself or as part of the Premiership collection, and also receive a Replicas Players Medallion, Premiership Cup and winner's photograph in this beautiful box. Or upgrade to the Collector's Album and continue to collect them every year.
Call or go online for your piece of Hawks history.
The government is planning to sell off our Medicare and PBS payment systems.
They're selling off the services relied on by Australians.
They're selling off my private health records.
They're selling off my job.
They're selling it off without a public mandate. And selling off the payment system is just the start.
The CPSU is fighting to stop the government privatising Medicare by the back door. Help us stop the Medicare sell-off.
Authorised N Flood, CPSU Canberra.
The mighty Ziegler & Brown Triple Grill. 3 stainless steel burners, 3 different heat zones, but great at cooking versatility. It's the complete barbecue system. The award-winning Ziegler & Brown Triple Grill. Choose the Ziggy that's right for you, only at Barbecues Galore.
Thanks for your company this morning with me, Kelly O'Dwyer and Nick Champion. On the broader budget debate, so we were looking at the aid issue and whether or not that's going to be suspended to pay for the military deployment. Labor's blocking a lot of things. There's going to be a point, isn't there, where maybe the mid-year economic forecast or next budget or the following year, there's going to be a point where Labor's going to be held accountable for the blocking that you're doing.
Well, you can't hold us accountable. We're not in government, and we didn't propose things like the $7 GP tax, which is a tax every time you walk into the doctor's surgery, every time you get a blood scan, every time you get a blood test or a scan, $7 each time. There's no way in God's green earth that the Labor Party's signing up to that, Kieran, and we will oppose that until until the end of this government. So we're not signing up to regressive measures just because this government came to office with a mandate that was not credible. They told a lot of pork pies in the run-up to the last election. Now they've decided to break their word, indulge in a lot of regressive politics, a lot of regressive economics that hit the poor and the middle. So we're not going to be in that. I think there's about $1 billion in tax revenue that they let the top end of town off, and sort of tax rorts and the like. So there are plenty of savings and revenue measures that the government can take, which would find bipartisan approval. Things like paid parental leave. They've decided not to do that, and as a result, their budget's in a mess.
Arguably, Labor's being more constructive than the coalition was in opposition when it comes to measures. $3 billion worth of savings going through probably today.
Strangely, Kieran, I'm not going to agree with you on that. But I mean, I thought your comment before, Nick, saying we're not responsible was very typical of what we've seen from the previous Labor government and members of that former government. I mean, you actually were responsible for getting us into the fiscal mess that we are now having to deal with today. I mean, you have delivered deficits that. I listened to you. I didn't interrupt you, Nick, and you have delivered deficits that have now added up to more than $240 billion. You're very good at talking about how to deliver a surplus. It's just that the Labor Party never did during a period where we had our highest terms of trade, and you bequeathed to us...
The global financial crisis. Mention the global financial crisis.
Just calm. You bequeathed to us more than $123 billion over the forward estimates in future deficits, right? So this idea that you're not responsible, the reason that we are having to put the budget back into the black is because of the mess that Labor left us. And we are having to make difficult decisions. Now, Labor is completely irresponsible. We had reports done, international reports done, that said that the spending growth in Australia was the highest of the 17 advanced economies in the world. That is what Labor left. We are having to constrain that spending growth, and more than that, we're having to pay back the debt that you have bequeathed to future generations of Australians, which was ramping up to $667 billion.
And I guess on top of that, you've got all of the debt issue, which we've made a lot of, but it's the military now, the military deployment, the national security measures, hundreds of millions.
Do you accept any responsibility?
Well, we had a global financial crisis. The Liberal Party voted for at least half of the stimulus package. They never acknowledged those facts. They never acknowledged that we've got a AAA credit rating. And we've had these debates many times before. The problem is that the government's budget puts all of the burden onto poor people.
We've got to go. Nick, Champion Kelly O'Dwyer, great to see you both. Thank you.
Great.